it's Rob and welcome to Axel's Garage. We are out here working on Jeff. Jeff is a 2005 Chevy Avalanche with a 5.3 and we got an issue. We don't have a check engine light. This is the evap system. I just made a video explaining the evap system in layman's terms and I'll link it right up here somewhere and in the description below. But we're not going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this. You need a new blackboard. So we believe we have potentially a purge valve problem. So the purge valve sits on top of the intake. I'll make that the intake and I'll make this the engine. Okay? And the purge valve gets fuel vapors from the evap system. And you could watch the previous video to go, and I'll just call this the fuel and evap system. All right, so fuel vapors are going to come to the purge valve. Now the purge valve is going to have a gazinta right here, and it's going to have over here, it's going to have an electrical connection. I'll just make that E, controlled by the PCM or the ECM. And then it's going to have this, an opening into the intake, which is going to then send it down into the engine, right through the fuel system, through the air fuel system into the engine. So it's going to take the hydrocarbons coming from this system, and it's going to, when it's appropriate to do so, it's going to send them down there. This valve is normally closed. This is the purge valve. It's normally closed. So this is closed off right here. So when you start the truck up and the truck is cold, it doesn't have to be temperature cold. The engine's got to be cold. It's got to be sitting. This truck's been sitting overnight. It's cold now. When we first started up, this valve should be closed. So if we disconnect the electrical, the power on the ground from this valve, the valve should remain closed when we start it up because there's nothing commanding it open. Now when you start it up cold, this should be closed, this valve. And then as it warms up, when the conditions are appropriate and the engine warms up, the PCM or ECM will apply ground to the ground side of this circuit. Power, it has constant power. The PCM will apply ground, completing the circuit, taking this closed valve and opening it up. And when it opens it up, it allows the hydrocarbons to come through the valve and to go down into the intake and mix with the air-fuel ratio, adding these hydrocarbons into there. And the computer knows, okay, I'm getting extra hydrocarbons from the fuel and the evaporative system, so I can kind of turn the fuel coming out of the fuel injectors down a little bit so that the engine is running at the proper air-fuel ratio. So if this valve is stuck open, let's say it's stuck open. Well, if it's stuck, let's first say it's stuck closed. If it's stuck closed, then it never gets those extra hydrocarbons, even though it thinks it's getting. And now if it throws a code, if the PCM and ECM realize through the ground circuit that this thing is not malfunctioning, so if you got a circuit error, it'll tell the PCM, put a check engine light on for this circuit error. But if this circuit is working good, but the purge valve isn't working good, and it's staying closed, the PCM or ECM might not realize that this thing is closed. It thinks that it's working and it adjusts the air-fuel ratio anyway because it's reading that from the oxygen sensors, which is way down the circuit. So the vehicle might run normally and you might not ever know that you even have a problem, except that your fuel consumption would be higher because you're not getting this added hydrocarbon flow. But it's going to be a slight difference in fuel consumption. Some people would never even know that there's a problem there, and they could drive for years with that problem and not have an issue. Issue is, it's a normally open valve, a normally closed valve. What happens when it's stuck open? Well, when it's stuck open, there's several things happen. Number one, these hydrocarbons are constantly coming into here, even when the engine doesn't want it. So now, if you remember back in the carburetor days, your engine had a choke, right? And it had a manual choke, and then carburetors had automatic chokes, and then fuel injection came into the thing and chokes went the other way. But remember what a choke was. With a carburetor, you couldn't increase or decrease the amount of fuel going into your engine on your idle circuit or your drive circuit. They were jetted, and the fuel was the fuel. So what you could play with was how much air went in. So you could richen up your mixture, not by adding fuel, but by taking away air, and that's what the choke did. So when the engine was cold, you closed the choke, which you choked out air. So you didn't allow air in, which made your air-fuel mixture richer. It had more fuel for when the engine was cold and needed to warm up. And as it warmed up, you opened the choke, or the automatic chokes would open up to bring that air-fuel mixture into where it should be for a warmed up engine. Well, in today's engines, we don't have chokes anymore. So, but we have computers and fuel injection. So what the computer is doing is saying, the engine's cold, I'm gonna add extra fuel through the fuel injectors because the engine's cold, so I get and then they're gonna read down here at the oxygen sensors the output of how much fuel is being burnt and the air-fuel ratios and stuff. So if this thing gets stuck open, there's added fuel coming in, which when the engine's cold and you start it up, could make it run rough because now you're running rich. You have too much fuel coming in. The computer's doing what it wants to do because the engine's cold, and then you're adding even more fuel, potentially. It's just fuel vapor, but it's still fuel into the system. So a lot of times when you have a valve, the purge valve stuck open, and you start your vehicle up, you don't necessarily get a check engine light, but you get a little rough running when it's cold, and then it smooths out as it warms up. You could also get a little hint of smoke out of your tailpipe, black smoke, a sooty tailpipe, because it's running rich until it warms up. Sometimes you get a smell, your nose meter will smell a little bit. One of the biggest things that you'll get when you have a stuck open purge valve is an extended crank, because now you have too much fuel. Two reasons. One, you have too much fuel in your intake system here, and it doesn't start as easy. It doesn't start right up. Sometimes it's got to crank a little bit, clear some of that fuel out, and then it starts up. Extended crank time, that's a big factor in this. The other thing with the extended crank time is, because this is now open and it's supposed to be closed, it's going actually down eventually. It might go through some components, but it eventually gets to your fuel tank, which sort of tries to maintain pressure in the fuel lines so that it's always primed and ready to start. So when a car has a purge valve that's stuck open all the time, when it sits overnight or sits for a few hours, you kind of lose that prime in the system because the system is open, and it adds to that extended crank time. So there's two things that add to your extended crank. One is it's a rich mixture that's trying to work its way out until it starts, and two is you lost your prime a little bit. So what you'll do is, when you have a vehicle that has that problem, you might cycle the key a couple of times to increase your prime. But when it starts up, you might puff a little smoke, or you might smell it, it's running rich a little bit until it warms up and it goes away. Or when you're cranking it in that extended crank time, if you give it a little throttle, which you're not supposed to do with a fuel injected vehicle, but if you do give it a little throttle, it helps clear out the rich mixture and gets the truck started again. That's the problem we have with Jeff here. So how do we test it? Well, we're going to take the engine cover off, and we're going to bring it in, and we're going to show you how to test a purge valve the easy way. Right, so I took the engine cover off. Right here on the top of the engine, here's your purge valve. Here is a service port. I don't know how to use the service port. That's not my thing. But now this valve should be closed right now. So if I take the wiring harness and unclip it, all right, so with the wiring harness disconnected, one side's a power, one side is a ground. Now I can check to see if I have constant power with the key on, and then I could check the ground circuit once it warms up to see if a ground gets applied. And that's how this works. Constant power, the valve stays closed, and then when the computer applies ground to it, the valve will open up, allowing the hydrocarbons from the evap system to come through this hose and go down into the intake system. Now, to further demonstrate how it works, here's a purge valve. Same purge valve that's on there. This is normally closed, so if you put your mouth around that, you can't blow through it, you can't suck any air through it. If you really wanted to, you could put power and ground to these two contacts, and you should be able to blow air and suck air through it. It'll work. This goes down into the intake via this little tab and the O-ring, and there's a little gasket that you reuse from the bottom of that one if that's what you wanted to do. But we can also check to see if we have symptoms. Now, our symptoms are extended crank. So extended crank system could indicate that the purge valve is potentially stuck open. Now, we've already checked to make sure that we have adequate fuel supply, that we have adequate fuel priming, and that we have adequate fuel pressure. All that checks out on this vehicle. That's why we're looking at the evap system. So we want to troubleshoot and see if this purge valve is stuck open. We're thinking it's stuck open because of the symptoms. We're extended crank. We're not having any problem putting fuel in the vehicle, which would indicate a different problem in the evap system. When the gas fill at the gas station constantly shuts off on you. We don't have a check engine light for any kind of evap, so we just want to really quickly check this. So how we could check this is by taking the hose off, and there's a little clippy dicky here, and you got to try to slide this guy. One goes in, one goes out. All right, so to get this clip out, I mean, if you're doing this, most of these vehicles are going to be old, and people love to show videos of it, you know, easily coming out on a nice, this is dry plastic. I hit it with a screwdriver to try to push it in, and the clip just came to pieces. So that's an easy fix. However, you're supposed to push it from this side, from the passenger side to the driver's side, and that's supposed to unlock it. It's on a little ridge of an O-ring. So you gotta get it all the way through and get it to the point where it wants to come out. It is a pain in the neck to find what you're actually doing here. I'll show you on a new one. This is the ridge that you're trying to push. That clip is below it, so you're trying to find the opening so that you can pop it off. Not as easy as they make it look. There you go. Once you find the spot, you get it in, and it goes all the way down, and you gotta like find that spot in the middle. If you go too far in, it's still locked. So you gotta sort of like slide it up, and then you'll feel when it gets to the point where it wants to go up, and that's where you can get it up from and get it off. Let me do it again. It's too far. Alright, so now you got it off. So now we got the line off, the electric off. So let's go back to the beginning. This should be closed because it's normally closed. So now with no electric hooked up, we turn the car on and start the car. This should be closed. So this is open to the intake to where it's sucking in the air for the engine. So if this is closed, there should be no vacuum here. If this is open, we're going to have a vacuum leak. So all you need to do is start the car up at this point and put your finger over here. And if you feel vacuum, you know that this valve is stuck in the open position, and then it's a bad valve. You could put a vacuum gauge on it, or you could just use your finger. I am just going to use my finger. We're going to start the car up, and I'm going to check and see if I feel vacuum. If you want, you could lick your finger a little bit so it's wet and you're making a good seal, and you could feel and you'll feel the suction. If it's all the way open, you're going to hear the suction probably.
It is on.
Right here I can feel, can't hear it, but I can feel a bit of vacuum coming through here. I thought it would be more, but it's not more, but it's enough that I know this should be closed and it's open. So what we're going to do is replace the purge valve. I felt vacuum, but not as much as I thought I would feel. So Any little bit of vacuum that you feel here, it means it's being sucked in by the intake, which means the valve is open. I expected, based on the extended crank time that we have in this vehicle, I expected this to feel a lot worse. I guess your results may vary. It could be stuck partially open, partially closed. It could be stuck in any position. It doesn't have to be full open either. It could fail anywhere. Like I said, I expected it to be worse. Your results may vary. Maybe this isn't it's a problem, but maybe it's not the whole problem. We're not going to know. We'll replace this purge valve in another video, and we'll continue along with Jeff, the Avalanche project. As always, I'll link everything in the description below, and thanks for watching.